was a savvy entrepreneur who'd made millions in real estate.
He was sort of a wheeler-dealer.
My dad's business, it was some amazing stuff. He really had a gift for that.
They were sort of living the life.
Anything and everything he could want.
But sometimes everything isn't enough.
There was blood all over the floor.
There was glass everywhere.
It's up to investigators to determine, did the millionaire pull the trigger? Or was he the victim of greed and revenge?
She's been taken for a fool.
He was the sole heir as the sole child.
Is there some type of conspiracy here?
Friday, September 30th, 2011. It's a quiet morning in the wealthy seaside town of Jupiter, Florida.
You have some very elite and exclusive communities that are big dollar communities in Jupiter. A full range of mega mansions.
But while most of Jupiter's well-heeled residents are still getting ready for work, a security guard responds to an alarm at the home of real estate developer Lanny Horowitz, his wife Donna, and their son Radley.
Admirals Cove is a private community. It's got an exclusive golf club in it, and they have from townhomes all the way up to the super mansions in there.
It's on the water. It's a strictly gated community. It's monitored. The alarm system from the house would ring through to the gate.
And in this residence, there's multiple glass break alarms, which activate when there's vibration, the sound amplitude. In this case, 3 glass break alarms are what tripped the alarm.
The security guard comes to the home. Radley's the one who's, at the door with him, and he describes Radley as being a person who's, groggy, a person when you just encounter them when they're waking up.
He must have been just driving by on a patrol, because, he was there incredibly fast. And I let him in the front door, and he went into the bathroom where my dad was.
The shower was running. There was blood all over the floor and the walls.
The glass was on the ground and scattered throughout the room.
On the bathroom floor, covered in blood, is a man the guard recognizes as 66-year-old Lanny Horowitz.
You can see one bullet wound on his side.
He describes, unfortunately, the gargling that we often see when people are very close to death, when they're gasping for air.
As Lanny draws his last breath, the guard rushes to call for help.
Yes, this is Admiral Security calling in because we have a dead person.
Lanny Horowitz's road to success began in Buffalo, New York.
My father got involved with his father at a young age with real estate. He apparently took to real estate like a fish to water.
Lanny was sort of a wheeler-dealer, real estate guy, always kind of looking for the next big real estate deal.
But while real estate was Lanny's passion, his first love was his wife, Donna.
My father was 15 and my mom was 14 at the time. As my father told me, he saw my mom coming down the stairs for the first time at his friend's house. And he knew right then I was the girl he wanted to marry.
She was a very beautiful woman. She was very stunning.
She was very caring and compassionate, but a strong woman.
They hit it off, and the rest is history.
The couple married in 1967, while Lanny was working his way through law school.
He never practiced law, but it was a huge help, because when you're a developer, the joke is you're basically a professional defendant.
As Lanny started his professional career, he and Donna started a family.
I was born in 1974. I remember a lot of snow and a big yard.
Radley was the only child of Donna and Lanny Horowitz.
A few years after Radley's birth, the family left Buffalo behind.
I was 3 years old when the blizzard of 77 hit, and both my parents and a lot of other people at the time decided it was time to go someplace south, a little sunnier, and as my father used to say, where the weather won't kill you. And then we wound up moving to Jupiter, Florida.
They live right on the water. There's full water access to the yacht club, and it's got an exclusive golf club. It's a beautiful community.
In the Sunshine State, Lanny set to work building his real estate empire.
He sort of had his hands in a lot of different pots. He was a businessman. You had cars and real estate, and Lanny had money. They were sort of living the life.
But now, Lanny Horowitz's life has come to a sudden, horrific end.
The call came out initially of a possible shooting incident which had occurred in Admiral's Cove.
It was like something out of a movie, just police and fire trucks and everything. And my mom and I are standing out in the driveway.
While Radley and Donna wait, investigators take stock of the bloody scene inside the mansion's master bath.
The scene is going to tell you what happened in this residence. So we take our time to observe and see what you have and digest what you have and see, is this what it's telling us, or is there something a little bit more to it?
There were no shell casings, and I did see a revolver. It had been moved by one of the security guys. So when he came in to do life-saving techniques, he moved the gun away.
The revolver was initially either near or in Mr. Horowitz's hand.
So the first officers that arrived from the Jupiter Police Department thought that they were responding to a suicide call.
But does the evidence tell a different story?
There's a shower to the right, and there's an obvious bullet impact through the glass door.
Lanny was shot inside that shower. There was blood pattern, cast-off spatter inside the shower. The shower glass had a white towel hanging over it.
You can see a hole through the towel that correlates to the center of where the bullet went through the glass door.
I knew right away it wasn't a suicide. There's no way he would have been able to shoot himself while he's in the shower from outside the shower.
We definitely have a crime scene.
Coming up, was a killer lurking inside Lanny's home?
He told us that it was a tumultuous relationship.
Police in Jupiter, Florida have just found millionaire real estate developer Lanny Horowitz shot dead in his waterfront villa.
Just the fact that a crime occurred there is shocking. A burglary there would be shocking.
The community where this case took place, Admiral's Cove, is a very, very affluent community.
There are numerous amount of gated communities, multi-million-dollar homes.
You're looking at Jaguars, Porsches.
But now, police are looking at a murder.
It was readily apparent that this couldn't have been a suicide.
The bullet came from outside the shower. We don't have a suicide here anymore. We have potentially a homicide here.
Investigators also realized that Lanny had suffered multiple gunshot wounds.
There was so much blood, we couldn't see all of the holes in him until the medical examiner came and started flipping him over and doing what he does. That's when we noticed that there were many bullet holes in his body.
When the blood and the glass are removed and they see where there are 10 shots.
And we knew that the gun that was closest to him in the hallway couldn't have been the only gun unless there had been a reload, because it had a 5-shot capacity.
That's when we started looking for the other firearm.
As you're looking at those 2 bathroom doors, if you take a jog to the left, you then enter into the actual master bedroom, which was, the second gun was actually back down in the bedroom on the dresser.
The second revolver also holds 5 rounds.
It's 2 5-shot revolvers. All 10 shots have been fired.
The guns at the scene, along with other evidence, tell investigators Lanny's killer isn't an intruder.
There's absolutely no way someone else got into that residence. Every single window and door was sealed up.
We also knew that the alarm to the house did not go off until the first shot happened.
They call them glass break alarm, but really the concussion of the trigger being pulled tripped the alarm. And I could tell you exactly to the second when 3 of those rounds were shot.
You'd had to believe that person got into the home without tripping the alarm, committed the murder with guns that belonged specifically to Lanny and Donna, and then exited the home again without tripping the alarm. It just doesn't make sense.
All the evidence points investigators in one direction. Lanny's death was an inside job.
Which means our suspect pool is immediately limited to Donna or Radley.
When investigators approach Donna, she appears too distraught to give them a statement.
Donna's sitting in the front seat of one of their vehicles. She's got her knees up. She's kind of almost like hugging herself. And we introduce ourselves. She never speaks with us, never answers or acknowledges us.
She sort of made motions like, I can't hear you.
And they basically had no further real interaction with Donna.
Investigators are able to speak with Radley, however.
I mean, I was afraid to, ask the cops anything, and I'm like, is my dad okay, And one of the cops just kind of, shook his head but didn't say anything, asked me a bunch of questions and stuff.
I did a gunshot residue test on him, which detects any gunshot residue if he was to have fired the gun.
Then investigators ask Radley to come down to the station for a formal statement.
I appreciate that. You coming in here at all to give a statement. He came and he brought his lawyer, which is his right, and we had no problem with that. Especially the fact that even though he's bringing his lawyer, he was still 100% open with us and spoke with us.
Although, for all his openness, what Radley tells investigators raises plenty of red flags.
They asked if my dad was abusive, I remember that.
Never physical with me. Psychologically, but just petty and nasty,
I said, only verbally, only mentally. My dad could be a real needling prick. He had a real way about him.
He described his father as being sometimes abrasive, very short. He told us that it was a tumultuous relationship.
My dad was never warm, effusive, like he used to say, I'm not a warm, effusive person.
Radley also admits that he and his father had suffered a major falling out a few years earlier, after Radley opened a gun shop near Jupiter.
I wasn't making very much money at it, but it was my passion. It was the one thing that I really, really loved, and he had given me some incredibly bad advice with the gun business.
Radley had wanted to order some kind of a kit that could transform a semi-automatic gun to an automatic gun. And according to Radley, he asked his father, who was an attorney, if he believed that it was legal, and his dad told him just to order it.
I took his advice, and that did not go very well.
Radley ordered the part and ended up being arrested and convicted and got sentenced to federal prison for some short period of time. But as a result of that, he lost his ability to have the gun shop, and he lost his ability to own or be in possession of a firearm.
It was a shattering experience, to say the least.
But was it motive for murder?
He was very hurt by the firearm situation. He was still sour about that.
Radley, over and over said, hey, listen, I didn't do anything here. I didn't do anything here. I didn't have anything to do with this.
Coming up, investigators put Radley's family ties to the test.
Can't live with him, can't live without him.
Police in Jupiter, Florida, are investigating the murder of millionaire real estate developer Lanny Horowitz. and Lanny's son Radley has just revealed a possible motive.
What Radley told me was he blames going to prison on his dad. And then when he got in trouble, his dad was unsympathetic and basically laughed at him.
Now suspicious of Radley, investigators ask him to walk them through the events surrounding his father's death.
Let's go over again. You tell us in your words what happened that morning. There were lots of little details that he gave us of where he was in the residence, how he woke up.
He was laser focused on every act he did.
What he said was, I got up, couldn't really understand what was going on.
I heard shots, and I don't think I heard any. I pulled out earplug. Those orange ones are pretty good. And screaming. And I got out of bed, and again, I don't know how many. I can't say how many shots I heard. But, and again, if that woke me up or what.
He said, I had orange noise-canceling plugs that you commonly use at the shooting range. He said, I had those in my ear.
Even with the plugs in them, it certainly woke me up.
He said, pulling the earplugs out, and that's when I heard the alarm going off. I rushed into my mom's room.
Radley tells investigators that he found Donna outside the bathroom door, apparently distraught with grief.
And I just saw, like, my mom screaming. I went to the bedroom door, and I could see my dad.
Radley said he sees his mom right outside that master suite area screaming and saying he was so mean. He's been saying he would do this. So he assumed this is the suicide. And he said that he could see his father's body laying on the bathroom floor. He said that he then asked his mother, can I get you some water? And he went to the kitchen and got her a bottle of water and gave it to her.
After taking Radley's statement, investigators returned to Admiral's Cove.
We went back in the house to see whether or not we could corroborate some of the things that he was telling us.
Somebody tells us what happens on scene. The point is not what they tell us, but does the evidence support what they're telling us?
There was one earplug he dropped in the hallway as he's going out, and the one was right next to his bed on the bedstand.
When we went back into the bathroom, there was a water bottle on the sink.
Everything that Radley told us, you could corroborate with a piece of evidence. So immediately that tells us, okay, he's being honest.
Radley was very cooperative, answering their questions.
Donna proves far less forthcoming, though.
She didn't give an interview.
Even at the scene, she wouldn't participate and have a general conversation out in the driveway.
She never spoke with any law enforcement directly.
Does that mean Donna has something to hide? Detectives suspect her first words to Radley might contain a clue.
She was, yelling like Radley. It was either he's so horrible or he was so awful. I knew he would do this.
He took that to mean that he committed suicide. In retrospect, who knows what she meant by those words.
Hoping for answers, investigators turned to the rest of Lanny's family.
In speaking with Lanny's sisters, we were able to get all those pieces of the puzzle of their life together.
Investigators learned that behind the millionaire couple's successful facade, their marriage had been struggling for years.
Once I graduated from school, stuff started to change with them, and my mom started to change. He was just always working, and she became resentful of that. And the more and more that my father got involved with it, the more that my mother felt neglected. Was the way that he had described it to me, and my mom told me that they were getting divorced.
Donna and Lanny had been married and then divorced. Then they got remarried and divorced again.
They had first divorced in around 2000, but they got back together and remarried, and it was down at a Justice of the Peace ceremony down in Palm Beach Gardens, just down the road from Jupiter, and I went along for that and got to see my parents Mary for the second time there. And then they wound up apart again.
However, it wasn't long before the couple reconciled a second time.
They did end up getting back together, and it was a lot of what you hear, just, can't live with them, can't live without them sort of thing.
At the time that this happened, Lanny had invited her into the house so that they could, according to him, be a family unit again.
The way my father announced it to me was, this weekend you'll help your mother move back into the house. And I was like, that's fantastic.
Although, according to Radley, his father had an ulterior motive: Donna's family money.
Donna's mother was very well off. Donna's father had played professional baseball and so had a good deal of money from that.
A couple of business deals hadn't come to fruition, so Lanny was sort of needing some money. The house was expensive to maintain.
She didn't see it as a loan to Lanny. She saw the money more as this is the way that they could live together in the family home.
I didn't know at that point how many mortgages were on the house in Admiral's Cove, but he convinced my mom to get $200,000 from my grandmother, and everything was pretty obvious what was going on.
This was nothing more than a ruse to get the money out of her, and she's been taken for a fool.
But did that mean Donna killed the love of her life?
It was clear that you had a woman who was angry and a woman who was fed up and finally broke.
Coming up, investigators uncover a game-changing clue.
We knew immediately that this was potentially an important piece of evidence.
Detectives investigating the murder of Florida millionaire Lanny Horowitz have narrowed their possible suspects down to two choices: the dead man's wife or his son.
Basically, we knew at that point we were dealing with, was it Bradley Horowitz or Donna Horowitz?
They were the only two people in the house when Lanny was shot.
Both Radley and Donna had compelling motives to pull the trigger. But when the results of Radley's gunshot residue test come in, it suggests he's not the shooter.
Radley had no gunpowder residue on his hands.
Could it have been washed off? Potentially. But I find it very doubtful that someone's going to then, immediately after those alarms are going off and security's already on the way, they're going to go and clean up their hands.
Just to be sure, investigators return to the house and perform a luminol test.
Luminol is a chemical we use to detect small traces of blood, maybe after a cleanup. I actually did it on all the sinks in every bathroom, the kitchen, and I think there was one in the utility room that I did also.
Lanny's sink was indicating of the luminol.
Could that explain Radley's negative test for gunshot residue? Investigators expand their search, looking for additional evidence.
They didn't know what happened. Is he covering for his mother? Did they do it together? Is there some type of conspiracy here between the two?
They further went through the home and they found her journal.
This was a personal journal of Donna's, so we knew immediately that this was potentially an important piece of evidence.
The early entries in Donna's journal reveal a woman happy to rekindle her relationship with Lanny.
It's very hopeful. She talks about how he's reached out and he wants to try again.
However, after Donna returned to Admiral's Cove, the contents of her journal started to change.
It showed her progressively getting more angry and just more upset about certain situations that were occurring.
They basically become very short entries about her daily interactions with Lanny and his lies to her.
There was mention of another woman, and you can tell that Donna didn't like it.
The other woman's name was Francine Tice.
Francine was involved in the real estate industry and was working with Lanny on a few different projects. The two of them were very tight, very good friends and business associates.
She was very, very sharp, very smart, and very much a type A, personality, a go-getter, much like my dad.
It developed into a very close personal relationship.
There was some suggestion that she was a mistress. We didn't really have any evidence to suggest that it was sexual or romantic in nature.
Francine vehemently denied having any sort of sexual relationship with Lanny.
Whether it was true or not, it was true to Donna. Donna absolutely 100% believed that Lanny and Francine were intimate with each other, and she documented in detail in that journal things that would support her belief that this was more than just a friendship.
Her entries in the diary showed, well, he's been with Fran all day. He goes here with Fran. He does this with Fran. It was clear that Fran became a point of contention for Donna.
The journal also makes clear that in the countdown to Lanny's death, Donna's anger of the alleged love triangle came to a head.
Donna said at one point in the journal that as things began to unravel quickly, Lanny said to Donna, "If I knew that Francine felt about me the way I do now, no, I would never have asked you to move back in the house." So she's basically heartbroken. He tells her she's got to move out. And I believe what the straw was, she finds out he's going to North Carolina, this last-minute business trip with Francine, and he tells her in no uncertain terms, you be moved out of the house when I get back.
There was a suitcase in the bedroom right outside the bathroom that was packed for him to leave on his trip that morning.
He was certainly ready to go, and I think that ultimately she said enough. You're not going anywhere. And it was sort of the last act of a woman's scorn.
You could see her getting more upset, getting closer to the date that Lanny was killed.
More and more layers start to pull back. The evidence is inescapable that, she absolutely killed Lanny Horowitz.
There was no question in our mind that this absolutely was Donna Horowitz.
On October 6th, 2011, 6 days after Lanny's murder, investigators placed Donna under arrest.
We had Donna under observation already by this point. Call was made, and they took Donna into custody.
She wasn't interviewed at that time, and she chose not to.
She was charged with first-degree murder with a firearm.
Coming up, will a jury believe that a mild-mannered 65-year-old is capable of murder?
It's not something that society is used to believing, that this upper-class white woman is going to go and just blast her husband 10 times.
Police in the seaside town of Jupiter, Florida, have arrested Donna Horowitz for the murder of her ex-husband, Lanny Horowitz. She's accused of shooting the millionaire real estate developer 10 times on the morning of September 30th, 2011.
Donna Horowitz was charged with first-degree murder with a firearm, and in the state of Florida, that's a mandatory life sentence.
It was clear to us, based on the evidence at the scene, that what took this from a second-degree classic crime of passion to first-degree premeditated murder was the number of the shots.
Premeditation, there's no time limit. It can happen in an instant, as long as it takes the actor to formulate the idea, the thought, the intent to kill.
Her trial begins in January of 2013 at the Palm Beach County Courthouse.
We informed the jury that you're going to learn about this family that lived a nice lifestyle in a beautiful gated community.
Admiral's Cove is a very prestigious, affluent area.
But according to prosecutors, the family's prestige and affluence masked a quiet desperation.
The events that lead to the morning of September 30th are tragic, but as old as time. And basically, to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's going to be clear to you beyond every doubt at the end of this that this was nothing more than a woman who was heartbroken and had had enough.
It was clear that there was tension, and my mom, you could see her losing weight and stuff as everything seemed to sort of be setting in with her over what was happening and what my dad had done.
It was always our position that she killed Lanny because she had a broken heart. You can feel her broken heart in the journal entries. That this was a woman scorned. This was a woman whose world was slipping away.
Prosecutors believe the final break came on the evening of the 30th, when Lanny announced he was leaving town with Francine.
Our supposition is that he's packed all his things and he's going away with Francine, and then she gets told, "You got to be out of the house when I return."
She came to a point of realizing that his behavior wasn't changing and that he was using her.
It was clear that she had been scorned and he had made a fool of her. He probably made fun of her and ridiculed her. And then he gets in the shower and has not a care in the world. And she basically said, enough's enough.
And I think she just snapped. She went into the bathroom, took both the guns, and while he's in the shower, she just unloaded the firearm.
That's the dance of death. Lanny was not standing still as he's getting murdered. He's ducking, he's rolling, he's weaving, and we know this because of the blood spatter everywhere.
She just continues to shoot. I think she was sick of the frustration, sick of all the comments he was making and the lies.
This is somebody whose world is slipping away, and they are outraged, they are hurt, they are upset. And the manner that this was done, the number of shots, this cries a woman scorned. This cries, love gone bad.
However, prosecutors claim that Donna's rage at Lanny didn't prevent her from trying to cover her tracks.
She switched over to that rational thinking pretty quickly, in that she hears the alarm going off and knows that she has to act quickly.
When Radley responded to answer the front door for the security guard, Donna had the opportunity to move the gun or do whatever, manipulate whatever she wanted to manipulate.
She puts one gun in his hand and then wipes down the other gun but puts it in the holster so people won't even draw attention to the fact that gun could have been used.
Luckily, they recognized pretty quickly that this wasn't a suicide.
But can prosecutors convince the jury that Donna is a killer?
It's not something that society is used to believing, that this upper class white woman is going to go and just blast her husband 10 times.
When Radley takes the stand for the prosecution, his stunning testimony just might be Donna's salvation.
He stood by his mom. He tried to justify actions.
I felt very bad for her. And I said a million times that if there was ever a case for battered spouse syndrome and temporary insanity, this would have been it.
Radley testified and remembered hearing Donna say he was just so horrible. He was just so horrible, sort of repeating that.
Radley never asked his mother if she killed his father. Radley never asked Donna, "Did you kill Lanny?" And the reason he didn't is because he didn't want to hear the answer. He didn't want to be the person who would have to testify and say, "My mother told me she did this."
He would never totally give his mom up. He said, "All I can tell you is it was only two of us there and I didn't do it."
Coming up, Donna repays Radley by committing the ultimate betrayal.
Here comes your mom, you're the person that's supposed to protect you, saying, "You did this."
The prosecution has rested in the murder trial of Donna Horowitz. The 66-year-old is charged with killing her ex-husband, millionaire real estate developer Lanny Horowitz, in the couple's upscale Florida home.
Our position was always that Donna Horowitz was losing everything. And ultimately, she decided that she had had enough.
Her frustration and her hatred became so much that she decided that she was going to kill, the love of her life.
When it's their turn, Donna's defense argues that she wasn't the one who wanted Lanny dead.
The defense argued that it was Radley or that Radley had hired someone to do this.
The defense relied on the smudge of a thumbprint maybe or fingerprint on a gate leading out of the house.
Could have been anybody. It could have been one of us. It could have been a firefighter. It could have been a gardener. It could have been some maintenance person. It could have been anybody.
The defense was trying to argue that meant that there was an unknown killer and that this could have been a hitman hired by Radley because he had purchased this paperback collectible edition of some kind of hire hitman or something like that.
Whether he'd pulled the trigger himself or hired someone to do it, the defense argued that Radley had resented his father for years, especially after serving time on federal firearms charges.
The defense was that he was still angry 5 years later about this weapons piece, that he blamed his father for that. He's pissed at his dad for giving him that advice.
Defense dug into every issue that he and his father had ever had, every conflict that he and his father would have had. They questioned him and pushed him on it. It was clear that Lanny was not a supportive father, and every misstep that Radley took, he was critical.
The defense was basically trying to make out that Radley was the angry, disgruntled child, but he also had ulterior motives, potentially for money, for the inheritance from his father.
Radley was getting everything. He was the sole heir to Lanny Horowitz.
He was due to get $500,000 in a life insurance policy.
Donna's defense seems to be going down this road of Radley's the worst person in the world. He must have done it.
I don't believe for a second that Radley ever dreamed they would be that aggressive and vigorous and basically unrelenting, saying that he was the one that did it. Who does that to their own child?
It got hard after you're listening day after day. You did this, when you didn't. And it was a lot for him.
All this stuff that her defense lawyer tried to say, a hitman and all this kind of crap. And he was just trying to do his job. And his job is to get his client off any way that he can.
On January 17th, the jurors retired to consider their verdict. And less than 2 hours later, they announced their decision.
Ultimately, the verdict was returned for second-degree murder with a firearm.
The jury did a great job seeing through the smoke and mirrors and everything that was being portrayed and put out there by the defense.
The judge sentences Donna to 32 years in prison.
Given Donna's age, it's a life sentence, practically speaking.
We were very comfortable with the outcome of it and the sentence as well.
Donna's single-minded pursuit of retribution had not only destroyed her own future, it also devastated the lives of the people she loved most.
What she did completely blew her family apart. You certainly can't justify something like that.
In this case, unlike a lot of our cases, there's no good guy or bad guy. There was no winner in this.
Lanny lost his life. Donna will never get out of prison. Radley lost both of his parents. Everybody lost, absolutely. And she didn't have to do that. She could have walked away. She chose not to.
She was kind of trying to still live up to that lifestyle of the affluent Jupiter community, and I think in somewhat denial.
There's been a lot of people in this country that want to present this sort of tremendous success through materialistic things, whether it's a house, whether it's cars, whether it's going on boats. And this is a tragic story where once that veneer was pulled back and there was debt and triple mortgages, then massive stress starts to come in. And people aren't honest with each other. And people don't deal with the issues. They just misdirect them. They bury them. And sometimes they explode.
She was a wealthy businesswoman in love with a ranch hand.
Kathleen was a very well-respected businesswoman in Vail. Everybody liked her.
He loved to laugh, and he just was a good time to be around.
Until their Western-style romance went dangerously wrong.
Please help him. He doesn't deserve to die.
And it's up to investigators to unravel the truth.
He told her that he was a hitman and had killed 32 people.
Guns and drugs is a very dangerous cocktail.
That was the point of no return.
June 27th, 2002. It's a quiet Thursday afternoon in rural Colorado when an Eagle County 911 operator gets a call from a local businesswoman named Kathleen Denson.
She had called 911 to report that she had just shot her boyfriend.
I think it does. Kathy, you have the gun in your hand. No, it's on the table. Kathy, where was he shot? In his heart. Please help him. He doesn't deserve to die.
Kathy says the victim is her ex-boyfriend, Gerald Cody Boyd, and claims the shooting was in self-defense.
While on the line with 911, Kathleen Denson was nearly hysterical. She didn't want Cody Boyd to die. She did tell the dispatcher that he was demanding money from her, but she was almost hysterical with the fear that he would die.
Police and paramedics are immediately dispatched to Denson's home, located on a sprawling 77-acre horse ranch in Eagle, Colorado.
Vail is about 15 miles up the river from Eagle. It's a very rich ski town.
I was at the sheriff's office at the time that the call came in, so I was actually one of the first officers on scene. As we're approaching the scene, there's a lot of things going through your mind as an officer. Is she still armed? Are there any other people in the residence? Any dangers that we need to be aware of as we're going up to that?
Officers find Kathy outside, still on the phone with 911.
I'll never forget the scene as going in. You could still smell the discharge of the firearm. You can smell the burnt black powder as you entered the residence. And then we went in and discovered the body in the living room. Mr. Boyd was laying on his back when I walked in. He was lifeless, and I could tell what appeared to be a gunshot wound on the left side of his chest.
It's already too late. He is found dead at the scene.
The first thing that I was curious about was what her story was.
There were absolutely no signs of a struggle that we were able to determine at the scene. There was no indication that she had any injuries whatsoever.
Investigators can't help but wonder if there was more to the story than Kathy will admit. From the beginning, Kathleen and Cody's relationship had been unconventional. He was just a simple cowboy, but Kathy had been born into money as the daughter of a successful Colorado furrier.
Her father started that company. She inherited it and grew it.
There's no doubt that Kathleen Denson was a very well-respected businesswoman in Vail. She ran the fur store, and everybody liked her.
She actually had not just the store in Vail that was very successful. She had 2 shops in Aspen, which is about 100 miles away. That was a very successful operation, made her a lot of money, and her shops were known for very high-quality merchandise.
But while selling furs became her profession, horses had always been her passion.
Kathleen was also known by the quarter horse set because she had a lovely 77-acre quarter horse ranch, Dragon A.
She was raising quarter horses. That's not a cheap hobby, so I assume that she was doing very well.
Her ranch, I'm sure, was quite well known, and her breeding operation was quite well known. It was her first stores that made her a wealthy woman. If she had positive income from the ranch, that was a big plus.
In the late 90s, she'd hired Cody Boyd to help her run the place.
He had bounced around the valley already 3 or 4 years here, and he had had odd jobs.
What I can remember about Cody Boyd is he had a strong personality. He also liked to have a good time.
He had a bit of a reputation as a ladies' man because apparently he was charming as hell. He just had this kind of just lovely Western drawl, and he had a twinkle in his eye, and he loved pulp stories, and he loved to laugh, and he just was a good time to be around.
Cody had been on the job for a few years when he divorced his wife. Soon after, their relationship became more than just professional.
It quickly developed into a romantic relationship. And then she provided for him, both as a handyman as well as her boyfriend.
As the story goes, he eventually went from the bunkhouse out to the ranch house and started living with Kathleen. Here's a wealthy, beautiful woman with money and land. It must have been an incredibly tempting situation for Cody Boyd.
In some cases, it's the allure and the mystery, the unknown, of really an opposite. So in some cases, the most passionate, fiery love affairs are born of these very different backgrounds.
Despite their differences, Kathy and Cody seemed to be happy together. So how had their romance ended? And why had it resulted in bloodshed?
It's hard to say exactly when things began to go south between Cody Boyd and Kathleen Denson. Cody Boyd convinced Kathleen Denson that he really, really loved her. That's completely at odds with the picture that emerged in the investigation.
Coming up, investigators uncover ties between the victim and organized crime.
Boyd was gregarious, articulate, friendly, but he absolutely had a dark side.
Sheriff's deputies near Vail, Colorado have arrested local businesswoman Kathy Denson for killing her ex-boyfriend, 45-year-old Cody Boyd.
We had a body laying inside the residence. We knew we had a person who claims to have shot the person that's laying inside the residence. So the first thing we got to do is we got to secure that scene.
One of the first things that seems out of place is the murder weapon itself.
She had set the gun down actually on the table in the kitchen.
It was an unusual weapon that she used. It was a black powdered gun.
That's one of the oddest things about the Denson case. This was a replica of a 19th century black powder pistol. Hardly the most effective murder weapon out there.
Because it makes a lot of smoke when you shoot them, and there's a recoil, and you have to cock it by the hammer to shoot it, and it's kind of fun to play old-time cowboy and load them and that sort of thing.
It wasn't what you would have used had you had any kind of prior notice that you'd have to defend yourself. In fact, it might have been the last weapon you'd use in that particular home.
But the antique pistol was powerful enough to kill Cody Boyd almost instantly.
Make no mistake about it, that is a very deadly firearm.
Mr. Boyd was laying on his back when I walked in. He was lifeless, and I could tell that what appeared to be a gunshot wound on the left side of his chest.
There was no signs of any struggle or any mark other than the gigantic gaping wound of the half-inch metal ball that killed him.
That bullet pushed through almost, I would say, 12 inches or more of bone and flesh.
Investigators find no evidence of a struggle.
As far as around Mr. Boyd, the decedent, we didn't locate anything of suspicious activity around him. There was no other weapons, nothing else that we had found indicating that Mr. Boyd was armed or anything like that.
To get a better sense of Cody and Kathleen's relationship, detectives speak to friends and other employees.
In interviewing the hired hands there at the ranch and also interviewing neighbors, we're talking to those folks to try to help us paint the picture of what kind of person she is, what kind of person Mr. Boyd is.
They discover that the romance had been over for a while now, and money seems to have been the root of the problem.
As far as we know, Cody Boyd had nothing when he came to know Kathleen Denson. He really fit the role of the misfit, the ne'er-do-well, not someone who was successful in life.
The word was that she had paid about $100,000 worth of his business expenses.
Kathleen had purchased like a motorcycle for Cody, had purchased a semi for Cody. I believe there was a Corvette that was purchased as well, but things started going south.
Friends also point to the drastic differences in the couple's personalities. While Kathy was quiet and reserved, Cody was larger than life and liked to tell stories about his checkered past.
Boyd bragged incessantly about his claim that in his prior life he was a mafia hitman, and he certainly had the guns and ammo to make that seem convincing.
The sheriffs discovered on the ranch a big gun safe, and in the gun safe there were at least half a dozen high-powered semi-automatic weapons.
You didn't have to be a very good shot. You just had to hold the trigger down and let the 20 rounds per second be expelled from your firearm. A nasty, nasty set of guns, to be sure.
In fact, it turned out Cody had purchased the antique pistol that killed him.
And it was a Christmas gift to Kathleen, who was living out on the ranch, from Boyd. And that's one of the great ironies of this. This was not a modern firearm, and even an original black powder pistol has a significant percentage of misfires. This is not a safe firearm to be firing, let alone being fired at.
It doesn't seem like the kind of weapon one might choose if they were planning to commit murder, which supports Kathy's story. The medical examiner's autopsy report is also in her favor.
The evidence was pretty clear that he was high on cocaine, and the evidence that she would be legitimately afraid of this man with whom she'd had a long-term romantic relationship.
Cocaine is a stimulant, and it acts on the reward center of the brain, the pleasure center of the brain. So the combination of euphoria with impulsivity and the reduction of the ability to put the brakes on can be a really dangerous combination.
Guns and drugs is a very dangerous cocktail.
It seems to be a clear-cut case of self-defense, until a new witness steps forward with a different story to tell. Coming up, Kathy is betrayed by one of her closest friends.
She wanted to let us know that Kathleen Denson is not who a lot of people think that she is.
After the first day of the investigation, it looks like modern-day cowboy Cody Boyd was killed by Kathy Denson in self-defense. However, Colorado police are about to learn that his ex-girlfriend's motives might not have been so innocent after all.
So what became apparent as we continued with this investigation was that it appeared that this was some sort of a love triangle. We knew that they were boyfriend-girlfriend, but then there's also this third person that comes into the picture, Monica Seebacher. She goes by Monique.
Monique was I believe a manager for the Vail store and was an employee of Kathleen's for several years.
Kathleen and Monique were basically also best of friends, and that certainly Kathleen confided in Monique.
However, it seems that friendship had been stretched to the breaking point. And when Monique learns about the shooting, she comes forward to tell Eagle County investigators what she knows.
She was a very forthcoming witness and wanted to be able to tell her side of the story. She wanted to let us know that Kathleen Denson is not who a lot of people think that she is.
He was in love with me, and things just, started escalating from there.
Monique Seebacher said that the reason why Kathleen Denson shot and killed Cody Boyd was because Cody loved Monique and not Kathy Denson. Now, whether that was true, I don't know.
According to Monique, her relationship with Cody began after Kathy kicked him out of the house.
2 years ago, Kathleen told me that her and Cody were having problems, and I had a 2-bedroom condo. She asked me if he could stay there while, maybe they work some things out.
It turned out to be a little bit of a disaster because Kathleen still loved Cody Boyd. And yet here she is shoving him out of the ranch and into the arms of another woman.
She wanted things to work out between them. And instead, he started a relationship with her friend.
The relationship between Seebacher and Boyd was certainly something that she wasn't thrilled about.
Monique says she tried to preserve her friendship with Kathy, but it was clear that she was still in love with Cody and unwilling to let him move on.
Certainly, Kathleen confided in Monique. I think the evidence showed Monique that wasn't always that straightforward and confiding everything back in Kathleen.
It made things very awkward for Kathleen.
Beyond the exterior, which she was effective, she was savvy, she ran a good business, was I would have to say, a pretty tortured personality and soul, and pretty conflicted.
Monique explains that because both she and Cody depended on Kathy for their livelihoods, they tried their best to keep their romance a secret. She confesses that Kathy's generosity came with other perks as well.
All three of them had pretty strong drug habits, particularly with the drug of choice in the glitzy ski resorts, that being cocaine. And she, Kathleen, had the money to keep them well supplied. Basically, she's supporting him and his drug habit, giving him lavish gifts.
She bought him a car, guns. He basically had money to do whatever he wanted.
But all along, what Cody really wanted was Monique.
For Boyd, he had the best of both worlds. He had a woman that he was getting money from and another woman who seemed to dote on him. It must have been an incredibly tempting situation for Cody Boyd.
Monique questioned him, "Why are you still going to see Kathleen?" And he says, "It's really hard for me to break up with her after all these years." That's pretty unusual, that kind of relationship, and the people involved, they're different. They're definitely different.
Monique says the beginning of the end came a few weeks before the shooting, when Kathleen asked her to help pick out an engagement ring.
There was a lot of talk of marriage, even to the extent that Kathleen had bought Cody a ring and she was going to or getting ready to propose.
Seebacher was a friend, at least that's how Kathleen considered her, and so it made things very awkward.
But the situation grew even more awkward when Kathy confided that she was planning a romantic getaway with Cody to pop the question.
Kathleen wanted to go with Cody to Cancun on a holiday trip. And Cody says, "If Monique cannot go with me and you, I'm not going to Cancun." So Kathleen was forced into kind of taking Monique.
Coming up, it's a tropical vacation none of them would ever forget.
The three of them agreed to go as a group to Cancun, and that's when things really fell apart.
As Colorado detectives untangle the love triangle between Cody Boyd, Monique Seebacher, and Kathy Denson, they begin to realize that Kathy had plenty of motive to kill her former lover. But what would she have to say about her best friend's accusations?
We wanted to find out exactly what happened. What are the circumstances that led up to this, and what led you, the suspect, to shoot the person that ultimately died? And so that's what we were trying to do as far as interviewing Ms. Denson, to get her side of the story, to help put the pieces of this puzzle together.
Under interrogation by Colorado police, Kathy asks for her attorneys and gives them little. But friends present a slightly different story from Monique's.
Kathleen Denson struggled with cocaine use during the period of time that she was with Cody Boyd, and that was part of the problem with him. Everyone wants to be loved, and Cody Boyd convinced Kathleen Denson that he really, really loved her. More and more, Cody Boyd was not just asking for things like a Corvette or a Harley. He was insisting on Kathleen giving him huge sums of money. And that really opened her eyes to what he was really all about.
But drug use and extravagant spending weren't the only dangerous things about him.
He told her that he was a hitman and had killed 32 people and was a bad hombre.
Kathleen Denson was looking for love in the wrong place, because Cody Boyd was trouble from the get-go.
At first, Cody's bad boy act was a turn-on for Kathy. It wasn't until their trip to Cancun that she realized just how terrifying he could be.
If somebody is highly invested in being an outlaw or a bad boy, then citing gun ownership or citing violence that they may have perpetrated demonstrates to another person that they've attained this level of expertise or competence in their so-called domain.
Kathy financed the luxurious trip and says that when she agreed to bring Monique with them, she didn't know Cody had ulterior motives.
The trip to Cancun was between Monique, Cody, and Kathleen. And during that trip is when Kathleen had started to realize that there was a relationship going on between Cody and Monique.
She brought a ring to Cancun to propose marriage, and he had turned her down.
It would have been horrible to find out that your boyfriend, your lover, is with your best friend when you took them on vacation with you.
She could no longer deny or explain in her own mind the fact that she was really not the love object of Cody.
Once you discover that you would feel betrayed.
But the trip had ended in far more than just a broken heart.
In Cancun, there was a heated argument, and according to Kathleen Denson, she was beaten up by Cody Boyd, flew back to Denver, and stayed basically in isolation because she didn't want to see anybody, and she didn't want anybody to see her blackened eyes and her very, very injured face.
She wanted things to work out between them. And instead, he started a relationship with her friend and with someone that worked for her. Someone who at some point in time was considered a confidant to her. And she had enough.
That was really the breaking point. That was the point of no return for Kathleen Denson.
When they returned to the U.S., Cody finally left the ranch and moved in with Monique. She was doing her best to move on from the betrayal when he unexpectedly showed up at her doorstep on June 27th.
On the day of the shooting, Kathleen Denson dropped her vehicle in town. She intended to take her 4Runner out on the road. She wanted to get some windshield time, some time for herself, and she enjoyed driving. When she got back to the ranch, it wasn't too long before Cody Boyd entered and began to threaten her.
Kathleen has said that he was trying to coerce her to give her another $300,000.
Fearing for her life, Kathy reached for something to defend herself with and wound up grabbing the antique pistol he'd given her. But in light of what they've learned so far, investigators find Kathy's version of events difficult to believe.
There were a number of different things that just didn't make sense in regards to what she was saying.
Cody was moving out his things from Kathleen's ranch and moving them into Monique's because he was going to live full-time with Monique. He didn't bring a weapon. He didn't have a gun.
On July 1st, 2002, 5 days after Cody's death, Eagle County prosecutors decide to formally charge Kathy Denson with second-degree murder.
This was the first homicide that I had investigated where there was this love triangle, and it just really muddies the water because there's so many different moving pieces.
I had concerns with a lot of people's credibility in the case. And that was an obstacle that we had to figure out, okay, what do we know versus what people exaggerate.
Coming up, the prosecution is betting that the evidence will prove their case. But will it be enough to get a conviction?
It was clear that she was a woman who was both terrified of the fact that she was charged with murder and horrified by the fact that she had had to commit murder.
"45-year-old millionaire Kathy Denson has been charged with murdering her ex-boyfriend Cody Boyd. If convicted, Kathy faces up to 48 years behind bars, but her attorneys seem confident she will be acquitted.
The prosecutors had an enormous burden. They had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Kathleen Denson did not act in self-defense. And from my perspective, the deck was stacked in favor of the defense.
He entered the home angry, came at her, and she picked up the black powder gun that just happened to be in the room and shot him. And it ended up killing him.
Based on the evidence, however, prosecutors are convinced Kathy wasn't motivated by fear. She was out for revenge.
He wasn't grabbing your neck. He wasn't brandishing a heavy object. They were having a heated conversation. Does that give one a license to kill somebody because you have an argument in your house and you are able to shoot them dead in the middle of the afternoon?
We had to show that there was a reason for the murder, that there was motive. But then at the same time, we also had to show that this also was not justified murder.
Prosecutors say that evidence taken during a search of Kathy's ranch house supports their case.
There was drug paraphernalia in the residence. There were a lot of videos that we had to go through.
There was a video of them snorting some drugs, we presume cocaine.
What got more publicity was the exotic gun collection and these videotapes that Cody and Kathleen made of themselves engaged in various sexual activities.
There was no indication of any type of violence being used. It looked very consensual, very caring.
The prosecution believes Kathy was still desperately in love with Cody.
The picture that was being painted was that Kathleen was a scorned ex-lover. She was not happy with Mr. Boyd. She had given him all these things to try to win his love, and she was just very upset. And then he came back that day. Kathleen just couldn't stand the thought of Cody not being with her anymore.
And while Kathy claims that Cody had a history of violence, the truth is he'd been lying to her from the start.
Cody Boyd was known to say a number of different things, grandizing himself maybe more than what he really was. It was something to take note of, but there was absolutely no evidence that he was any type of mafia hitman or hitman at all.
I'm not aware of any prior criminal history on his part. I'm not saying he didn't have any, but if he did, it certainly wasn't significant enough to leave an impression on us.
One of his kinks was trying to get respect as a feared hitman when there was zero evidence to show he had anything to do with that.
Prosecutors argue that because Cody posed no actual threat, Kathy never had a reason to shoot him.
She had no injuries. There was no indication that she had been in a struggle or that she was in fear.
And interestingly, Kathleen never claimed. She said he kept coming at me. I was frightened. She never claimed there was any physical contact between the two.
And ballistics evidence from the scene appears to prove the distance between them.
When a gun fires, it creates stippling from the burning gunpowder. He had stippling from below his knees, on his pants, up on his face, to the top of his head. That means that the cone of burning gunpowder was in excess of 4 feet.
The prosecution noted that there were 2 doors that Kathleen could have fled out of instead of picking up the revolver and shooting the guy.
They believe that once Kathy had made her choice, her intent was clear: to kill the man who betrayed her.
Kathleen Denson was not a stranger to firearms, but was hardly an expert markswoman. At the distance that she had to fire that black powder pistol, it would have been hard to miss center mass, and that's what she aimed for.
She took a very drastic course of action for which there was no coming back.
However, Kathy sticks to her claim of self-defense, and her attorneys argue that it doesn't matter whether Cody presented any actual danger. For her, perception was reality.
Kathleen Denson really believed that Cody Boyd was a hitman, maybe in a prior life, or maybe even then. Mostly, she knew he was the kind of guy that wouldn't hesitate to hurt her. He'd already done it in Cancun.
Mr. Robinson's theory was clearly that Boyd was attacking her and was about to commit or had committed a crime against her.
Coming up, the defense's argument gets put to the test.
It was a self-defense case involving a woman who was scared to death of a man who was in her home. What defense lawyer wouldn't want a case like that?
Prosecutors in Eagle County, Colorado have finished arguing their case for murder. Now it's the defense's turn to convince the jury that Kathy Denson only shot Cody Boyd to save her own life. Their argument hinges on the state's home defense statute, known as the Make My Day Law.
Under that law, Kathleen Denson had a right to use deadly force, even if all that would have happened would be getting beaten up again by Cody Boyd. She didn't have to let him hurt her before she could use deadly force.
Over the course of their relationship, Cody had built himself up as a dangerous hitman, so Kathy had every reason to believe he would kill her.
He had military-style weapons. He had conversions of automatic and semi-automatic weapons. He had the large banana clips. He was everybody's nightmare in a world where mass shootings have become all too commonplace. An astronomical number of firearms were in the home.
Some of them were altered to be fully automatic weapons.
To prove their point, the defense makes a surprising move, asking Kathy to describe what happened in her own words.
Kathleen's attorney, Scott Robinson, put Kathleen on the stand, which is pretty unusual in a murder trial because, you could say something wrong and cook your own goose.
When Kathleen testified. She was impeccably dressed. She, very attractive woman, very poised, articulate.
Appearance, dress, manner of speech, the way somebody wears their hair, the number of ums that they say. All of these things can impact jurors' perception of the credibility of a witness.
Kathy testifies that when Cody Boyd showed up at the ranch that day, he was enraged and also appeared to be high.
Cody Boyd had really wretched teeth, and Kathleen had agreed to pay for a complete restoration. Boyd was showed in the bill $20,000, and he was quite upset. She's immediately frightened because he looks crazed. He looks angry. He demands money.
One of the defense's pathologists did an autopsy on his own of Cody and found cocaine, and they found a sleep drug, I think halcyon, and they found, I think, THC from marijuana. And the pathologist said, you know, these drugs could cause some people to get hostile.
He was in a drug-induced rage and was coming at her.
The fact that he claimed to have a darker past certainly played a factor.
The defense argues that whether Kathy intended to kill him or not, Cody had left her with little choice.
The defense felt that Mr. Boyd was coming down there, was being hostile and aggressive towards Miss Denson, and she felt no other recourse other than to defend herself.
Oftentimes, emotions will lead to immediate behavioral responses on people's parts. So there's no cooling off period. There's no time to think and to let the emotion calm down.
The timeline was easily established because he had just been at the dentist. We know exactly when the 911 call went in. So there really wasn't much of a delay between Boyd arriving at the ranch and Boyd receiving the fatal shot. Cody Boyd was high, he was angry, and he was going to go get what he had coming. Of course, as things turned out, he got exactly what he had coming.
But would the jury agree?
It was a very stone-faced jury. They were very hard to read.
The jury has a tough job to do. They're weighing somebody's life in their hands, and, they have to go with the information that was given here.
After only 2 hours, they return with their verdict. To the surprise of many, they find Kathy Denson not guilty.
The jury decided that she did not commit a crime, but it was a homicide. It was a death caused by another person.
Whether the jury acquitted Kathleen Denson because of the Make My Day statute or the self-defense statute or some combination of both, we'll never know.
Only 2 people were there that actually know exactly how it transpired. One of them was dead.
Everybody went home that day except for Cody.
It's a tragic case. It's tragic because I think a lot of people didn't feel that justice was served.
What began as the unlikely romance between a wealthy rancher and an itinerant cowboy has ended in betrayal and bloodshed. But the question remains, who is ultimately to blame?
Miss Seebacher, when she took the stand, there were a lot of inconsistencies with what she had said. So, it painted to the jury that she was not very credible, that, maybe she's a scorned person in this particular case. So I'm trying to seek revenge on Miss Denson.
The people who knew Kathleen Denson believed in her. There was no backlash. The impact on Kathleen Denson was a lot more subtle. Quite frankly, she has never gotten over the trauma of shooting and killing Cody Boyd.
He was a beloved father working hard to provide for his family.
He was a family man. He was a good guy.
He was a very doting parent. He had settled in as a typical suburban father.
Until a cold-blooded assassin descended on a local gas station.
It was so brutal. It literally was just done with no regard for this man's life.
We had a rather big whodunit.
You got a guy with a hot temper. Who did he piss off?
The investigation would take detectives into the upper echelons of wealthy Ohio society to catch a killer out for revenge.
Are they going to retaliate against me? This is scary.
Saturday, June 16th, 2001. It's a busy weekend in the quiet Midwestern town of Akron, Ohio.
It's a suburban area, really, with these large, sprawling homes, lots of acreage. And, you know, it has its strip malls, it has its suburban communities.
It was Father's Day weekend and quite crowded. There was a lot of traffic.
Then suddenly, a shot rings out amidst the crowd of shoppers.
Emergency. I need immediate help. We have gunshot wound at BJ's Wholesale Club. He's got a gunshot wound to his face. He's bleeding profusely.
Is he conscious?
He barely.
The incident occurred at a warehouse club at their gas station, so a public area. And here you have a person pulling up in a motorcycle and shooting one shot.
It was just like so nonchalant. It wasn't at night. It wasn't sneaky.
There were several people who witnessed it, but the person was wearing a helmet and a mask so that he could not be identified.
The assassin's target is a man sitting alone in an SUV. By the time police arrive, he is already dead. The victim is identified as 44-year-old local businessman, Jeff Zack.
When it went through my mind, I was wondering who would do something like this and hurt his family like this.
Before settling down in Akron, Jeff Zack had grown up in another Rust Belt town, Detroit, Michigan.
Jeff Zack was born in 1957, and from what I understand, he was abandoned by his birth father.
The divorce was very hard on my children. In those years, it was very unusual to get divorced, and it was just very hard.
Jeff Zack was fortunate in that his mother remarried, and he had a stepfather who was apparently quite prominent in his life and took a good deal of interest in him.
He was my firstborn child, my firstborn son. He was very smart, very vivacious, very interesting kid.
Jeff's parents encouraged him to pursue his dreams. So in his early 20s, he decided to leave his hometown behind.
Jeff Zack decided to branch out and see the world. He traveled to Israel. Most people of Jewish ancestry have automatic dual citizenship over there.
He joined the IDF, which is the army for Israel. He wanted to become a pilot, but he didn't quite qualify.
He couldn't become what he wanted to become. He had to join the Air Force and become a paratrooper for the Israeli Air Force. But he learned how to speak Hebrew fluently, plus a lot of Arabic and a lot of other languages.
But after completing his tour of duty, Jeff struggled to settle back into civilian life in the United States.
He had the kind of personality that alienated a lot of people. He could be successful at times, but he had an abrasive attitude.
He was this big, kind of in-your-face type of guy. You know, you didn't want to piss Jeff Zack off.
He was trying to be rich. He did whatever he had to do to survive.
Until one day, Jeff met the woman who would change his life forever.
Bonnie and Jeff met in Arizona. in 1986. And they fell madly in love, and they kind of just ran away together. They were quickly married afterwards.
Before long, they had a child together.
Brian was born after a few years, so they were ecstatic, and he has always been the sweetest, most darling child. And they lived in San Diego for a couple of years. And then they decided to move back to Akron. Her parents lived in Akron, and they thought they could do better there and would have family there.
They lived in a single-family dwelling in a nice area called Stowe, which is a suburb of Akron.
When I think about Jeff, I think of him as like a family man, a person I was proud to meet, and he loved his son.
He was a very doting parent. He was very involved in his son's life.
But Jeff would never get the chance to see his son grow up. Now he's been gunned down in cold blood by an unknown assailant, and Akron police want to know why.
He was a great father, and he was a husband. And he was murdered in broad daylight. It just didn't make sense.
Brian was 12 and a half when Jeffrey was murdered. So mean. Right before Father's Day.
I never just couldn't get it, on why, who would do something like this to him.
Coming up, was Jeff Zack the family man he appeared to be?
He liked to talk to women, and sometimes that got him in trouble.
"44-year-old Jeff Zack has been murdered outside a busy shopping center in the suburbs of Akron. As detectives speak to witnesses at the scene, they are stunned by the brazenness of the attack.
Mr. Zack pulled into a gas station, and an individual came up on a motorcycle, stopped, shot Mr. Zack in the face.
He did this during daylight, which is, he had a lot of nerve.
The killer had been careful to cover his tracks. Investigators managed to find only one piece of evidence.
A projectile was found at the scene about 100 yards from the vehicle that Jeff Zack was in. That was a good find, but there was nothing really to compare it with.
And although the shooting occurred in public, no one is able to provide a clear description.
The shooting happened so quickly that no one really had the time to get a good look at the perpetrator.
That person wore dark clothing and a motorcycle helmet with full darkened face mask, so the face couldn't be seen.
However, witnesses did get a good look at the killer's motorcycle.
It was a ninja-style motorcycle. They call them crotch rockets.
It was like a racing motorcycle, one that the witnesses said was built for high speed.
It was one of those bikes that you lay forward on, and it has high horsepower. It was black and white, trimmed in green, like a fluorescent or a candy apple green.
Investigators issue an alert, but without a license plate number, they know the chances of finding it are slim.
Even though this murder took place on Father's Day weekend in a crowded parking lot on a shopping day, the police really didn't have much to go on.
What do you have, really? You have this shadowy figure who pulls in, commits a murder, and drives away. Nothing else.
No one seems to have any idea who might want to kill Jeff, but his wife, Bonnie, is able to give detectives a promising lead.
Shortly before his murder, there was a phone call to the residence indicating that you have one more chance to get out of this. And Bonnie told Jeff about that phone call, and he was very nervous about it.
at the job sites, he would tell me that he was getting a phone call, and I'd be like, Jeff, just don't worry about it. Don't get stressed out. Just let's get the job done. And I never knew it would just end up to the situation that it ended up to.
We recovered that voicemail, and it was a veiled threat to Jeff Zack that he had a short time left and that he better do the right thing.
Investigators want to know, who was this mysterious caller?
She holds nothing back. She says, look, my husband, he was involved in some really shady business.
Here was a guy who had a very bad temper, who had business dealings that had gone south, numerous bad business dealings. So this was a guy who made enemies spontaneously.
He was arrogant, abrasive, and when you deal with a victim that's like that, your investigation is going to go into a bunch of different directions. You have to keep an open mind and follow up on everything.
Detectives learned that one of Jeff's bad business deals led to a heated argument in the weeks before his death.
Jeff and Bonnie's house had wind and rain damage to it, and these two independent contractors were going to repair it. Well, they took the money and then they ended up not doing the work, and Jeff was threatening to turn them over for insurance fraud. And there was exchange of words between them. One of the contractors, we thought, was the one that had threatened him. He remained a suspect up until he took him past the polygraph and was eliminated as a suspect.
When investigators asked friends and family if Jeff had problems with anyone else, one name immediately comes to mind.
He would talk about, this lady. I never did knew her, but he would always talk about this certain lady.
Jeff was hardly a monogamous husband. There was a long-time affair with a local woman named Cynthia George.
Cindy George was married to a man who owned a huge restaurant.
I heard of Cynthia George and Ed George because they own Tangiers in Akron, and Tangiers is a pretty prominent place.
They were considered elite in Akron, not the average by any means.
After work, Jeff Zack, he would more or less have reasons to go over there to hang out.
But according to Bonnie, her husband was doing a lot more than just hanging out.
Jeff Zack and Bonnie Zack would be in the Tangiers, and Cynthia would walk by, and just the eye contact alone between them, you could tell there was something going on.
Bonnie was devastated. Cindy pretended to be a good friend of the family and of Jeffrey's. But we all suspected that it was an affair.
Detectives sit down with Bonnie Zack, and they have to empathize with her a little bit. I mean, this woman just lost her husband, the father of her children.
Their affair had also led to other complications.
As Bonnie described the relationship between her late husband and Cynthia George, she disclosed that not only were they lovers, they shared something else in common. They shared a love child. In fact, one of the George's children, who Ed George embraced as his own, was apparently Jeff Zack's offspring.
Coming up, did his wife's infidelity drive Ed George over the edge?
As a jilted husband, he had the motivation to have him taken out.
Detectives in Akron, Ohio have gotten their first lead in the slaying of local businessman Jeff Zack. After speaking with his widow Bonnie, investigators have ruled her out.
They found her to be relatively gracious, relatively honest, did not seem suspicious in any way.
And according to Bonnie, Jeff had been cheating on her with one of the most powerful women in the city, nightclub owner Cynthia George.
In May of 2001, right before the homicide, Bonnie found out about it. Jeff told her that he cut it off.
Could Jeff's killer be his ex-lover or her husband?
Detectives told me that they suspected Ed George as a culprit because he seemed to have a motive. His wife had a child with Jeff Zack. Maybe he felt shamed.
As investigators dig deeper into the Georges' marriage, they learn that Ed and Cynthia had always been an odd match.
Cynthia grew up in North Canton, which is south of Akron, and it's kind of a Rust Belt town.
Cynthia George had come from rather humble stock herself. She was the daughter of a coal miner, and the family struggled.
The Georges were wealthier and had the Tangiers restaurant. And I think some of the Georges felt as though Cindy was not good enough for Ed George.
The couple had first met when Cynthia auditioned to become a dancer at the Tangier in 1978. But as soon as Ed laid eyes on her, he had other plans.
Cynthia was Mrs. Ohio runner-up at one time. So here is this beautiful woman kind of gracefully walking throughout this club at night.
She was a strikingly beautiful woman, and Ed was a successful man, and the chemistry seemed to work for them.
Soon they got married. If Cynthia George was looking for a golden ticket, certainly Ed George was it. You know, when investigators look at this, they're like, well, wait a minute. Cynthia George, Ed George, very wealthy, and here's Jeff Zack. He lives in a suburban house. He does not have any money. How does it fit?
After gathering all their information, detectives quite reasonably decided to pay a visit to Cynthia George.
They began asking her questions because she's connected to this victim. You know, she's like, who, me? I've done nothing. I don't know anything.
She did admit that she knew Jeff Zack, but she wouldn't elaborate any more than that.
Cynthia George may not want to talk, but her husband has a lot to say about Jeff Zack.
Ed George wasn't home when investigators first questioned Cynthia. So they go to Ed, and they want to question him. Ed tells this kind of contradictory story to what his wife had told.
He described Jeff Zack as something of a menace. He said that Jeff Zack had been phoning the house, he'd been calling the house and hanging up. To Ed George, he wasn't just a nuisance. Jeff Zack was a harasser.
Now we have two different stories from a married couple who both know the victim. Wow. You got to look further into that.
To find out whether Bonnie Zack's claim about the Georges' child is true, they request a court order for a DNA sample.
Police wanted to confirm whether this tale about Jeff Zack fathering a child with Cynthia George was indeed true. I mean, at this point, you know, they're hearing information from people, but it's basically gossip.
Cynthia and Ed George are very prominent in the community of Akron. So when this did come out regarding Jeff Zack possibly fathering a child with Cynthia, I mean, it was unbelievable. It was just mind-boggling to people.
Ultimately, police were successful in obtaining a court order to force the George's child to take a paternity test. When the test results came back, it turned out that biologically she was not Ed George's child. She was indeed Jeff Zack's child. At this point, police realized Cynthia George had been carrying around a very weighty secret.
If Ed discovered the truth, it seems plausible that he'd want to take his revenge. But investigators know that isn't the only possibility.
They're thinking, geez, either Cynthia or Ed George could have hired someone to kill Jeff Zack. Or maybe it was Cynthia George herself on that motorcycle who killed Jeff Zack. Maybe it was Ed George.
She had motive for getting rid of Jeff Zack because now there could be a custody battle, and Ed George had motive because if he did know, maybe he was so shamed by this scandal that he wanted to get rid of Jeff Zack.
Coming up, a new suspect unexpectedly enters the picture.
Police get a call, and bang, this thing just opens wide.
Several months into the investigation of Jeff Zack's murder, Akron police are looking into millionaire couple Ed and Cynthia George and their relationship with the victim.
Cynthia and Jeff had a relationship for approximately 7 years. They even had a baby together.
However, detectives still have no hard evidence tying either of them to the crime.
Jeff Zack was a pest. He was a harasser. He was the father of one of the George's children. But there was nothing really beyond that.
Because they don't have enough evidence really to charge Cynthia or Ed George. What do? They've taken it as far as they can go.
I thought the investigation just stopped, for some reason. Then everything came out.
On the 1-year anniversary of Jeff Zack's death, the Akron Beacon Journal publishes an article about the case. It leads to the breakthrough investigators were hoping for.
Shortly after the article ran, a tipster phoned the Akron Police Department and said, "I know who the shooter is."
And that tip comes with a name. John Zaffino. John Zaffino is this kind of short, stocky guy, mustache, slick back hair, a wannabe gangster. If you're looking for a profile of a murderer, John Zaffino, he fits it. But here's a question. Why would John Zaffino murder Jeff Zack?
When investigators track down John Zaffino, he refuses to answer any questions. But his ex-wife is more than willing to talk to police.
It was just a cold case for a year. And then Christine Zaffino, who was John Zaffino's former wife, came forth and said she suspected that John Zaffino and Cindy were involved in the killing of Jeff.
He had told her things that made her suspicious. The police were investigating him.
According to Christine, John Zaffino had admitted to her that he had recently had an altercation with Jeff Zack. And she asked him straight out, "Are you the guy who shot him?" And he said something to the effect of, "Well, let's put it this way. He's going to have a hard time parting his hair from now on."
When detectives play the threatening voicemail on Jeff's answering machine, Christine is absolutely certain it's him.
She said, "No doubt about it. That is the voice of my ex-husband, John Zaffino."
If anybody should be able to recognize his voice, it would be ex-wife.
Christine also has a good idea what his motive might have been.
Even though John Zaffino and Christine Todaro had broken up, she kept track of different occurrences in her ex's life. And she knew that he had been dating a woman who was attractive and older and had money.
And they say, "Well, do you know her name?" She says, "Yeah, I know her name. She's very popular in town. Her name's Cynthia George." So where's the common denominator? Where's the connection between John Zaffino and Jeff Zack? Well, the connection was at the Tangiers. Cynthia George.
This was not a love triangle so much as it was a lover's quadrangle. While Cynthia George was married to Ed George, she was having affairs with both Jeff Zack and police determined John Zaffino.
John was kind of a blue-collar guy. And Cindy originally was a blue-collar woman, so maybe there was this attraction there.
How much she really got deep into a relationship with John Zaffino is possibly still a question. But their relationship developed
at least significantly.
At this point, Cynthia is refusing to speak with investigators and does not admit to an affair with John. But DMV records provide detectives with another piece of evidence.
They discovered that, lo and behold, a month before Jeff Zach's death, what had John Zaffino purchased? A motorcycle. And not just any motorcycle, a black and lime green motorcycle, like the one seen at the crime scene.
My captain, Beth Doherty, found the motorcycle in Pennsylvania on a publication called Cycle Trader. And that's when Mike Schaefer and I were tasked with going to recover it. We located the bike, and we learned that he had transported there at night. He was desperate to get rid of the motorcycle, and that he wanted to trade it for any car that they had on the lot.
It's enough for police to make an arrest. On September 25th, 2002, they take John Zaffino into custody.
One domino has now fallen in this murder case. But investigators know there will be others.
Coming up, did he kill Jeff Zach to keep Cynthia George to himself? Or was he a hired gun?
Investigators are saying, look, was Cynthia involved? Was Ed involved? Did they pay you to do this?
Investigators in Akron, Ohio have arrested one of Cynthia George's lovers, John Zaffino, for the murder of her other lover, Jeff Zach. But they believe there is still more to the story.
We cleared Ed George of any involvement in this, and Cindy remained a suspect, but we didn't know how much until John Zaffino became a suspect. And then the more he became a suspect, the more the involvement of Cindy was believed.
Under interrogation, John tries to deny everything.
John Zaffino says, I'm totally innocent. I had nothing to do with this. In fact, I was at a car show in Pennsylvania the day the murder occurred. So I have an alibi.
People were located that he supposedly was with and interviewed, and they didn't support his alibi as far as timing. He had enough time to do the murder and travel down there and use that as his alibi, but it didn't hold up.
His phone records proved to be even more incriminating.
Then you look at the phone records immediately after the homicide. Who does he call? He calls Cindy George.
John Zaffino talked to Cynthia George just before Jeff Zach was murdered and just after he was murdered. Now, why would he do that? He would do that for two reasons. One, to say, I'm on my way to kill him, and a second time to say, I just killed him.
Prosecutors offer John a plea agreement in exchange for testimony against Cindy, but still, he refuses to talk.
Obviously, we wanted him to cooperate. He did not do that. So there's two inferences to draw, that Cindy wasn't involved or he's loyal to Cindy and was not going to rat her out.
They could tie John Zaffino directly to the motorcycle, and they knew that his alibi was false. And so they said, all right, let's take this guy to trial.
In February of 2003, almost 2 years after the crime, John Zaffino stands trial for the murder of Jeff Zach.
Even though Cynthia George was not on trial herself, the foundation of the case revolved around Cynthia George. Cynthia George was apparently John Zaffino's motive for committing this murder.
What the prosecution presented was that Cynthia had an affair with Jeff Zach. And when it ultimately ended, Jeff Zach kind of couldn't let it go. That he kept trying to contact Cynthia. Cynthia said, this gentleman's harassing me and I would like you to take care of it. And allegedly John did.
They even put Cynthia George herself on the witness stand.
Cynthia was called as a witness to his trial.
She pleads the fifth. Why would you do that? You would do that if you had things to hide. You would do that if you thought what I say is going to get me in trouble.
For the jury, Cynthia's silence is just as incriminating as anything she could have said.
On March 11th, 2003, John Zaffino was found guilty of murder.
He was given life with, I believe, his first opportunity for a parole hearing would be 23 years later.
He's sent away forever on a murder charge. Now, what will that do to John Zaffino?
Still, John refuses to talk.
We were hoping that John Zaffino would testify against Cindy. That just never occurred.
The public sentiment by the end of 2004 was that Cynthia George was the mastermind of this murder. Everybody was talking about that.
It was horrible. And I did some interviews purposely because I wanted it out there that I felt Cindy was involved.
It isn't until the following year that investigators feel they have enough evidence to finally prosecute her.
The big break was that John Zaffino and Cynthia George were talking. There were calls from the prison to her that were recorded. And those calls started to reveal that perhaps there was a conspiracy here to commit murder, that Cynthia was involved. The prosecution believes that Cynthia George was basically paying money to John Zaffino, and John was dangling over her head with this ambiguous threat, if you will, that he was going to drop a dime on her at any moment if she didn't pay.
On January 10th, 2005, Cynthia George is placed under arrest.
Police moved in on Cynthia George as she was shopping. She was arrested very publicly in a very public place.
The reason for it was twofold. One, they wanted to make a statement to the town, to the city, that they never gave up on this case. Number two, they wanted to put fear into Cynthia, to let her know that, listen, you're not above the law.
The police called me to tell me that they had indicted Cindy and that they arrested her, and I was ecstatic.
Coming up, will Cynthia George be convicted, or will wealth and power help get her off the hook for murder?
If you got money, you can buy your way out of most of anything.
More than 4 years after Jeff Zack was killed, Akron millionaire Cynthia George stands trial for conspiracy to commit his murder.
This case attracted a lot of interest in the city of Akron.
This case had everything, really, that the public ate up. Affairs, illegitimate child, wealthy people.
Due to the widespread media coverage, Cynthia's lawyers make a surprising request.
Cindy was afraid that maybe that publicity would have affected the jury.
Rather than being tried by a jury of her peers, she decided to have a bench trial, which meant her fate would be decided by a judge.
The old adage is everybody wants a fair trial as long as it's in their favor.
On November 14th, 2005, prosecutors make their opening arguments before the judge.
The prosecution had some concerns because they didn't have really John Zaffino saying, yeah, she told me to kill him. But what they did have is they had a lot of document evidence, meaning they could show money changing hands.
When authorities accessed the financial records, they discovered that a month or so before the murder, $5,300 had come out of Cynthia George's account, And approximately $5,300 had been used to purchase the motorcycle that was used to kill Jeff Zack.
It was just too coincidental, all of the bank statements that matched what was out of Cynthia's account to the penny.
They also draw attention to the communication between Cynthia George and John Zaffino at the time of the shooting.
Remember the phone calls? The phone call before the murder and the phone call after the murder. Was that a coincidence?
I was very happy because I knew evidence was coming out against her and that she would probably be found guilty.
However, Cynthia never admits to an affair with John, and the defense argues the state's evidence is purely circumstantial.
Even though you could imply that Cynthia George may have been involved in this case, there was no concrete evidence that she was the puppeteer in all this. In fact, it was entirely possible that John Zaffino, who was a bit of a hothead, decided to kill Jeff Zack on his own.
Those records don't prove that Cynthia knew what he was going to use that motorcycle for.
On November 28th, the court reconvenes to hear the judge's decision.
Everybody reassembled in the courtroom. Cynthia George stood up, she faced the judge, and the judge said, "I have rendered my verdict."
She was found guilty. I was very satisfied.
Cynthia George was sentenced to life in prison. You can hear her family wailing in the courtroom, and it's pretty heartbreaking.
Her family became hysterical, but I, of course, was happy. I felt that justice was served.
Cynthia wastes no time in submitting an appeal.
The conviction of Cynthia George was appealed up to the 9th District Court of Appeals, alleging errors occurred at the trial court level, which caused her to be found guilty.
She hired the best appellate lawyers she could get. And, the thing is, it's very, very unlikely that an appellate court would overturn a murder conviction. So she was not facing an uphill battle. She was facing Mount Everest here.
But a year and a half later, she achieves what many believe to be impossible.
On March 21st, 2007, the charges against Cynthia George were dismissed by the Court of Appeals.
That appeal decision just really blew everybody involved in this case away. Really did.
When you read their opinion, they wanted evidence of solicitation and procure. They wanted a conversation from the state where Cindy George is asking John Zaffino to commit the murder. We did not have that. We had solely circumstantial evidence.
After her release, the George family releases a statement saying their faith had sustained them and that they are moving forward with their lives as a family.
Last I heard, Cynthia George was, living the happy, elite life with her husband and her kids, who are all grown now.
In my eyes, Cynthia George got away with murder.
It's a sentiment shared by many in the city of Akron. Many felt that a woman of wealth and privilege seemed to have taken revenge on a former lover, something Cynthia George has always denied.
Do I think the George's money, status, and standing in the community had anything to do with that verdict being overturned? Hell yeah, I do.
Cindy had the benefit of great attorneys. She got top legal help in this case.
The fact that she got out after 16 months kind of upset me, and I miss them horribly. It was horrible loss. It took a lot of years of pain and anguish. I don't think anybody suffers as much as a mother.